of the problems with fall in New England is that we tend to think once the leaves fall, it's time to hibernate for the winter. This morning, we're going to try not hibernating in one of the strange, warm days that shouldn't be warm at this time of year, and go exploring instead to see what there is left to see after the maple trees have finished their glory. To make this exploration more interesting, I have invited someone to join us on our walk. Jane Gordon, well-known Concord historian, will walk with us on the Emerson-Thoreau Amble as we try to figure out what ambling is all about and whether it's an activity too cold to do late in the fall. Joining us remotely is Delia Kay, Concord's Director of Natural Resources. If we were ambling in Thoreau's time, we'd start at Emerson's back door and cross an open field, I imagine much like Haywood Meadow today. 2 centuries later, briar and swamp alder bar the way. So instead, the Amble meanders through wetlands that edge Millbrook. The way treads lightly on boardwalk over fragile ground to the first of 4 stream crossings.
So the trail includes 2 bridges, one over Millbrook and one over a tributary to Millbrook, as well as a number of boardwalks that were constructed. We were required to get permits for those, and the goal of those permits is to ensure that there's no adverse effect to wetland resource areas. And so with the bridges, looking to understand where the wetlands are, what the potential effects would be, and putting in, mitigation, which in our case what we did was plantings. We did native shrub plantings.
Not far beyond, Jane and I emerge on Cargill's Field, back in the reality of Saturday traffic in Concord. At this point, we've come to the edge of Walden Street, and the community gardens are across the way. Walden Street, as you see, is a great location for biking enthusiasts and crows who know that winter's coming. Was there anything here before the community gardens?
Yes, this is actually where the town poorhouse was located. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, who lived across the Millbrook, used to talk about hearing the cries and howls of one particular woman across the brook at the poorhouse.
Well, this at least is something I remember from my childhood. Now it's the Concord Ice Company, but I remember it as the Concord Ice and Coal Company. The road to the ice company leads to much more interesting places as well. And that's where the real ambling begins, to my mind anyway.
I just love this part of the Emerson-Thoreau Amble because it brings us out in this pastoral agricultural landscape, which was so much the landscape that Emerson and Thoreau knew. When they got out of the center of the village, they really could see those beautiful fields and orchards and tillage lands, and that's part of what they love to wander in. And they could contemplate very familiar surroundings, but they could always find something new, something different, something miraculous in the commonplace. As Thoreau said, heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads.
My impression is that Thoreau and Emerson had a very different perception of what ambling might be good for, that it really was good for something, and that they had a whole different way of looking at walking in the woods. So Jane, in our amble mentality, what do we see here?
Well, I guess what I'm looking at is just the way the path curves and then it curves out of sight, and I don't know, I just love the idea of not knowing exactly where I'm going to be going next. I think we're always trying to look way in the distance and take the long view and look for the sweeping panorama, but it's often really important just to stop and look down and just see the beauty that's right around us and under our feet. Here's what Thoreau writes in his journal. I wish to live ever as to derive my satisfactions and inspirations from the commonest events, everyday phenomena, so that what my senses hourly perceive, my daily walk, the conversation of my neighbors, may inspire me, and I may dream of no heaven but that which lies about me.
Our path leads next to the town forest, public land bought with a bequest by native son Hapgood Wright. The town forest movement was the 20th century's first reforestation effort, as New England began to undo 3 centuries of clear-cutting. White and red pine plantations filled in the gaps of abandoned farm fields. I love the way the woods open out when we get to the Hapgood Wright Town Forest section of the Amble. And even here, when it looks like pretty obvious pine, trees with no leaves on them, occasionally birch, there are surprises, like the hollow in front of us. The hollow, my guess is it's a sinkhole, actually, on the floor of the forest, part of the extraordinary landscape.
I think that's part of the fun of ambling, because you stop and you ask yourself these questions, and there are little mysteries, and you just wonder about things.
Eventually, we come to Fairyland Pond, a favorite recreation spot for dogs and geese alike. The lack of leaves on these little swamp maples nearby allows us to look through at the collection of geese who have found a quiet place to stop and think before they move on to warmer areas. And behind them, the high bush blueberries and the oaks give a wonderful range of color still. We continue up Millbrook, above Fairyland Pond. Harder to see now, but still trickling along its way, until at last we come to the spring. Brister's Spring, the source of the Millbrook that provided the water power for the town of Concord. It's said that Emerson and Thoreau always had a sip of the water here on their way by. So here we have a piece of recreational land in Concord, which is here to encourage people to amble.
Yes, and I think that even in Thoreau's day, most people, as he said, didn't know how to take a walk. You're entering into some kind of almost sacred place where you're able to be at one with your thoughts and that great inspiration of the natural world.
Here's the important question after all of this walking. Is it better to walk from Concord to Walden on this trail, or to walk from Walden to Concord, to go back to the world?
Boy, that's a really good one. I think because you've got a connection between the world of the central village and the world that is kind of the commercial and the civic and the cultural heart of Concord, and then a connection from the central village to the areas on the margins, on the outskirts of Concord, where it's wild, unbounded, uncontrolled. You could think about walking from the village out into that wilder area as a way of not escaping, but just removing yourself from from everyday life, just in order to have a little bit of peace and quiet and time to think. And then you could also think about walking back into that central village, that you've now had that chance to kind of re-nourish, inspire, re-intoxicate yourself, and then go back into the world of everyday life and confront it in a more peaceful way.
Yes,
Yeah.
we both agree on that.
Yeah.
Of course, if you decide to take this walk in the middle of the summer, if you start from downtown Concord and walk towards Walden, you get to swim at the end of it. There's something to be said for that. Behind Brister's Spring, where Jane and I part company, the land slopes up Brister's Hill toward Route 2 and Walden Pond. Here the awareness of Emerson is eclipsed by Thoreau as we enter a reclaimed wasteland that is now Walden Woods. The trail, called Thoreau's Path, is marked by his musings on natural wonders. What though the woods be cut down? This emergency was long ago provided for by nature. She not only begins instantly to heal the scar, but she consoles and refreshes us with fruits such as the forest did not produce. Finally, we come to the heart of Walden Woods and discover something wonderful growing out of the wilderness, a stone circle filled with the thoughts of Thoreau and others for whom Henry David Thoreau was one of the great thinkers of all time.
There were early visionaries of the trail, people who saw the ability to connect land from the center of town to Walden Pond. Obviously the trail doesn't just cross town land, it goes from Haywood Meadow, which is the town, crosses over the Emerson land, and so working closely with the Emerson Association, and then enter the town forest up to Walden Woods project land, and then crossing over Route 2 to DCR land, the Walden Pond State Reservation.
There's a lot more ambling to do here. Cross the busy Route 2 to find more miles of trails through the woods of Walden Woods, around Walden Pond, away from the noise of trucks and cars and the busyness of the everyday world, and find your way perhaps at last to the Sudbury River, where another kind of ambling can take place.